Welcome to The Explainer. Let's just jump right into it. Today we're dissecting what is honestly one of the absolute creepiest short stories floating around out there. We're going to completely unpack its psychological tension to figure out exactly how it gets so deep under your skin. We're talking about a story that is incredibly brief, but so wildly effective that the source text flat out calls it a masterpiece for horror fans. So, if you're fascinated by how narratives can build just unbearable suspense in a handful of sentences, you are definitely in the right place. Picture this. It's a completely grounded, entirely mundane setting. A typical couple living in America. But right beneath that ordinary surface, intense arguments have been brewing for days. And then, during one of these fights, the husband is just blinded by rage. In this horrific, unforgivable moment, he murders his wife and buries her in a pit. But here's the terrifying kicker to the whole setup. Their young son is completely oblivious. He's literally just sitting at school while his entire world is violently ripped apart. It's an incredibly dark, heavy premise that hooks us into a gritty reality right from the jump. Section 1. The father's internal conflict. Now this is where the absolute genius of the story kicks in. The narrative completely swerves away from the gory details of the crime itself and zeroes in entirely on the psychological burden crushing the father. I mean, the body is buried, the physical act is done, but the psychological torture, that has barely even started. If my child asks about his mother, what will I tell him? That one single agonizing thought becomes the guy's entire universe. We aren't just reading a crime story anymore. We are sinking into this deeply claustrophobic exploration of guilt, paranoia, and sheer internal panic. Our source emphasizes just how consumed the father is by this. He is practically paralyzed, just waiting for his son to come home and ask that inevitable question. So we are really putting the father's deteriorating mental state under a microscope here. The text describes him as being highly distressed, obsessively replaying the scenario in his head on a loop. Every single time he glances at his kid, he's basically bracing for impact. He's trapped in this state of constant, suffocating dread, carrying around this deadly secret that feels like a ticking time bomb just waiting to go off. Section 2. The agony of silence. Okay, so right here, the pacing just grinds to a halt. And it does it so brilliantly. It shifts the horror away from a quick, brutal act of violence, straight into the agonizingly slow torture of anticipation. A full 24 hours pass in total silence. The kid doesn't ask a thing about his mom. Then 48 hours pass. Still, absolute silence. The source really highlights the mundane details here. Breakfast happens, lunch happens, dinner happens, day after day, all completely normally. By putting the horrifying reality of what the father did right next to these completely innocent, incredibly boring family routines, the story stretches our nerves absolutely to the breaking point. And it just keeps stretching that tension. The father is constantly, and I mean constantly, bracing for a confrontation that never actually happens. It turns every single meal into a psychological minefield. That eerie normalcy is honestly what makes it so disturbing. The child's silence isn't a comfort, it's a weapon. This delayed reaction completely maxes out the suspense, leaving both the father and us dangling in the state of agonizing uncertainty. Section 3. The terrifying final question. All right, we've reached the climax. That unbearable silence is finally about to snap, but the way it breaks, it is going to shatter everything in a completely unexpected way. We've got this stark contrast happening. On one side, there's the expected horror, the earthly, mundane terror of a father trying to explain away a disappearance to his innocent kid. That's the horror he's been mentally prepping for all week. But on the other side, we get the actual horror, a chilling, supernatural nightmare that completely blindsides him. It all starts with a look. The source mentions that one day the child finally speaks up, but he does it in this incredibly strange way. He's just staring intensely at his dad. The father, who is obviously already on a razor's edge, gets confused and immediately defensive. He snaps, asking, "Why are you looking at me so strangely? What happened?" In his mind, this is it. He thinks the kid is finally asking where his mother went. But here's what the kid actually asks. "Papa, why have you been carrying mom on your shoulders for so many days?" Wow. Just let that sink in for a second. That single sentence drops like an absolute anvil. It completely recontextualizes the whole story in a flash. The father's internal paranoia? It wasn't just guilt. It was a literal physical haunting. He thought he buried his wife, but she has literally been riding on his back this entire time, perfectly visible to their child through all those silent, everyday meals. Section 4. A masterpiece of horror. I mean, what a breathtaking twist, right? And that brings us to our final analysis. Like our source claims, this might seem like a really simple story on the surface, but for horror fans, it is an absolute masterpiece. And when you look under the hood, it's easy to see why. This is a perfect execution of micro-horror. It uses extreme brevity to hit you with this massive psychological impact. Notice how it relies almost entirely on the father's internal tension. There's no graphic gore, no cheap jump scares, just pure, concentrated dread, capped off with a sudden, paradigm-shifting twist that flips everything you thought you knew upside down. So, bringing it all together, the real brilliance of this story is what it forces your brain to do. It builds up this unbearable internal tension, it totally subverts your grounded, true crime expectations, and then it forces you to visualize the true horror yourself. The text never actually describes the ghost, it just gives you the kid's perspective. It leaves your own imagination to paint that horrifying image of the murdered mother silently gripping her killer's shoulders day after day. Which leaves us with a really fascinating thought to ponder. As you process this little masterclass in suspense, you gotta ask yourself, does the true terror here lie in the literal supernatural ghost clinging to the father's back, or is the ghost really just a manifestation of the inescapable crushing weight of his own guilt? It's a fantastic question about both the literal and metaphorical consequences of our darkest actions. Anyway, thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep analyzing, and I'll catch you next time.